Hi everyone, welcome to our Wednesday Wisdom Follow the Reader segment and series. I'm so excited to be talking to you today. I've been away for a few days. I hope you've missed me. I've definitely missed every single one of you. Thanks for all the messages, the plethora of communication through Twitter, through social media, all of your messages saying that you're missing our live series for a few days. I was out speaking at some conferences, attending some conferences, learning a lot so that I could share lots more with you. So I'm really excited to be with you here for this segment of Follow the Reader and also Wednesday Wisdoms. And today's conversation is really exciting. I'm going to be revealing our special guest very shortly. And it's unbelievable that we're talking about this amazing topic today, this amazing book as well that we're going to discuss on what is the International Day of Peace, or Peace Day, or World Peace Day, whatever it is. So many hashtags flying around, but wherever you are in the world, it is International Peace Day. So I hope that you're going to be sharing any insights on Twitter or on Instagram today with our session, hashtag Follow the Reader and hashtag World Peace Day, whichever one you feel like using. Get involved in that conversation. And now I'm going to welcome our very special guest for today. His name is Doug Abrams. He's the former editor at the University of California Press and Harper San Francisco, and also the co-founder of Idea Architects, a book and media development agency that works with visionary scientists, spiritual leaders, scholars, to create a wiser, healthier, and more just world. And I think this is absolutely fantastic, Douglas, that we have you here with us virtually. So welcome to the show virtually.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, it's brilliant to have you here on Follow the Reader. And today, for everyone who's out there, we're going to put this in the comments section. You can check out the book that is available for order right now. You can have it to your door. It's called The Book of Joy. And this book is a fascinating conversation. And this is what I love about it. I was sharing this with Doug just earlier. I love the fact that it's a conversation between two extremely special personalities, who are His Holiness Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And I just want to start with you, Doug. I want you to let me know, this dialogue between two great personalities, why is this conversation relevant for our world? Why is this book relevant for the world we live in today?
Well, I think it's so appropriate that we are talking on Peace Day, because these are two of the world's great icons of peace and compassion and love. And I think that what was fascinating, like your show, we actually asked people to send in their questions to the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu when we met in Dharamsala. And we got over 1,000 questions. And the fascinating thing was that the question that most people wanted to know was, it's the Book of Joy. It's about how to live with joy in the face of adversity and suffering. But what most people wanted to know was, how do we create joy, not just in our life, but in our world? And how do we live in a world that seems to be so pained right now and anguishing and suffering, whether it's terrorist attacks or ecological destruction? And it was so magnificent to hear these two men who have seen so much pain in the world, in their countries, in their own lives, talk about how our world is actually getting better, and how we actually it looks from the news that things are getting worse, or that our world is going to hell in a handbasket. But in reality, there is so much love and compassion and caring in our world. And if we recognize that, and if we cultivate our own joy, then we can bring joy to others and to our world. And it was quite beautiful to see.
Absolutely amazing. It's great. I feel so grateful to be having this conversation on this day, because it feels like it's just meant to be, and it's really resonating with me. I mean, how long were you with them both for, and what was it like to be around two people? And I loved what you said, and this is what I feel so relevant for our audience. These are two people who've seen pain in the world. They've been there. They've seen it in their people. They've seen it in people across the world. What was it like to be with them? How long were you with them for? And yeah, what was it like? Tell me.
Well, so what we did was we actually had the opportunity to bring Archbishop Desmond Tutu to Dharamsala, India, which is the Dalai Lama's home in exile. And we got to spend a week together, and to have them spend a week together, which was really incredible, unprecedented, really a historic meeting for the two of them, and to get that kind of time together. And what was so amazing was to see the love and the fun and the humor that they have with each other. That's the incredible thing. So you think these are two great holy men, and they're going to be, it's going to be the meeting of two great holy men, and it's really like a comedy duo where they're laughing and taking the mickey out of each other and jazzing each other and laughing the whole time. And the whole week was filled with laughter, some tears. It was just amazing. And then we sat down and we had 5 days to actually explore the deepest questions of our lives about how we create joy, how we face the obstacles to joy, and how do we find meaning and purpose in our lives. And as we were doing this for the 5 days that we sat together, circled by five film camera crew, and it was, I will say I'm skeptical of people who say that when they're in the presence of great holy men that they experience something different. And I was very skeptical about that. But when I sat there and I'm sitting there looking into their eyes for 5 days, and I'm getting this tingling and this kind of experience of almost like their deep compassion and their love is being transmitted into my mind and my heart. And that's really what I wanted to give to readers, was that experience of what it's like to sit down and look into their eyes and feel that experience of understanding the joy that they live in their life and how we can create it in our own lives.
We've got this great question from Jo here, Doug, that I'm going to read out to you. She
Sure.
says, the problem with peace is that there are those who flat out who do not want peace. How do we affect those people?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, actually, I think what the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Tutu talked about is that we have to win over those hearts and those minds, but it's frankly going to be through compassion that we do this. I mean, that we have to understand the suffering that they're experiencing and why it is that they choose violence over peace. It's a great question. I mean, because frankly, one of the issues that was raised was how can the Dalai Lama forgive China for the fact that they've invaded his country and sent him into exile. And one of the things that he said, which I thought was so beautiful, was that actually you can have compassion and love for those who are doing you harm, because you recognize that they are creating, in the Buddhist understanding, karmic repercussions for what they're doing, and they're actually suffering, and that's what's causing their suffering. And I thought it's a very profound shift in our understanding of the violence that is happening in our world, which doesn't mean we shouldn't confront the violence and doesn't mean we shouldn't stop it. So when they were talking about forgiveness, they said you forgive the person doesn't mean you don't stop the actions. And we definitely do need to recognize that those who choose violence need to be stopped.
Brilliant. Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Joe. If you are just tuning in right now, we are joined by Doug Abrams, who's put together this fantastic book called The Book of Joy, a delightful conversation about today's main topics, main themes that are impacting all of our daily lives and collective global issues. A fantastic conversation between His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. So this is that conversation that we're discussing. I want you to get involved in the conversation today. Anytime Doug says anything that resonates, that you connect with, press the like and love button so that we know you're tuned in, and press that share button so that on International Peace Day, we can have this great conversation and start by spreading peace, spreading compassion. I can see so many of you have just joined in online right now. I'm so excited to be tuned in with you. And this conversation is brilliant to be sharing and having on this day. Share your questions. Any questions you have that you could have asked the Dalai Lama, you could have asked Desmond Tutu. You can ask Doug right here today. He spent a week with both of these in India, and just listen to them speak, listen to them interact. He's lived with them, right? So hopefully he's going to be sharing insights and wisdom with us. Now, Doug, I have this question. So
Sure.
You saw this dialogue. Now, I loved what you said, that it was a week of laughter. You were talking about how they were both, having fun together. I find that spirituality or spiritual leaders are often seen as so serious. We have a certain expectation of how they express love and how they express compassion. What I'd like you to share with us is how did they both express and share love similarly, but also differently, right? How did they both in their own lives, beings, the way they speak, what were the similarities in that expression and their agreement of compassion? And what were they doing differently?
Well, I've had the privilege of working with a lot of great spiritual leaders, and I think there's almost like a universal index of spiritual development, which is humor, a sense of humor and laughter. And you find the great spiritual masters like the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu have this extraordinary sense of humor, this deep well of an ability to laugh at themselves, an ability to laugh at life. And before getting into the differences or the similarities, I'll tell you a great story that the Dalai Lama told us when you talk about how spiritual leaders can be so serious. So he talked about being at an interfaith conference, and he was sitting next to this Indian spiritual master who was sitting on a chair very stiffly in his chair. And he told the organizers of the conference that his chair was not high enough. So they had to bring bricks to raise his chair so he'd be higher than the other people in the gathering. And I think these guys are so humble and so just real that you forget that that's not always the case with spiritual teachers and spiritual masters. So the Dalai Lama was saying that he was sitting there hoping that this guy's chair would topple over so that you would see what a real human being he was. Because when things go wrong, the reality is everybody becomes human. And I think what you see when these two incredible human beings are together is you see real human beings. And that's the incredible thing is, the Dalai Lama is considered an incarnate Lama in his tradition. He's considered almost like a Christ-like bodhisattva figure. And but when you meet him, there's just this incredible humanity and this incredible sense of we're all in it together. So throughout the week, he would just poke fun at and play with the different people who were there. So the sound technician, Juan, was miking him up, and he would pull on Mike's beard and, just kind of make jokes with him. And he was basically saying, today I am the Dalai Lama and you are the sound technician. Tomorrow, or maybe in the next life, I'll be the sound technician and you'll be the Dalai Lama. And so there's just this extraordinary sense of real connectedness, humility. And I think they both have that. In terms of their differences, let me think, that's a good question. I think that one of the fascinating things that was different is that, and was that, these are two very different traditions, Christianity and Buddhism. I think what they both were adamant that this book should not be about a Buddhist book or a Christian book. This is a universal book about how, we find joy in our lives as human beings, regardless of our faith, even if we have no faith. But they both really had the ability to share that sense of the heart of humanity, and at the same time, so they got into this kind of argument about whether we accept our shortcomings and our human foibles, or whether we can get over them. So the Dalai Lama, in the traditional Buddhist practice, was saying that actually we can create something that he was calling mental immunity, which is the ability to have less anger, have less fear, have less suffering. And of course, in the Christian tradition, and Archbishop was saying, yes, we can through spiritual maturity, like it's like a muscle. As we exercise our muscle, we can develop these capacities. But he was really adamant that we shouldn't make people feel bad for the suffering that they have and for the pain that they experience and the anger and the fear and the sadness. These are natural human emotions. And one of the things that was really fascinating in this book was we had the opportunity to combine the latest science on joy and happiness with what these two great venerable spiritual leaders were saying. And in fact, they really connected and confirmed what they were saying in so many ways. And so that was really interesting to hear the fact that, what the scientists are telling us is there are basically four fundamental human emotions. There's fear, anger, sadness, and joy. So fundamentally, when we're talking about the book of joy, when we're talking about joy, we're talking about what it is that is positive and satisfying about being human. So we went into every aspect of how we live a life of satisfaction and meaning, and how then we can bring that to the world and create a more peaceful world. To come back to the question about creating peace, one of the things that was interesting, we had a birthday party for the Dalai Lama while we were there that we talk about in the
Brilliant.
book. It was fantastic. A little surprise party for the Dalai Lama of 2,000 people, and we had we brought trick candles, which was particularly fun. But one of and the Dalai Lama danced for the first time in his life, which was
Wow.
incredible. As a Buddhist monk, he's not permitted to dance. But so the Archbishop Tutu, who has an irrepressible boogie, got up when the band was playing "We Are the World," and he's all elbows and he's boogieing there, and he gets the Dalai Lama up, and the Dalai Lama does a little shimmy and a little jazz hands and doing a little dance for the first time in his life, and it was just incredible. Talk about amazing joy. But one of the questions that was asked by the students at the birthday party was, can joy lead to world peace? And what he was saying is, yes, he thought it could, because when we create joy in our own heart, when we create joy in our family, when we create joy in our communities and in our world, then we actually have less desire for conflict or anger or fear or sadness. And so in many ways, what they were talking about is not just how we change our own lives, but how we change the world as well.
Doug, I'm just going to add that you did remind me of that famous quote by Mr. Miyagi from The Karate Kid, where he said that never trust a spiritual leader who cannot dance. So it's nice to see the Dalai Lama celebrating dancing on his birthday. So guys, I'm going to take some of your questions. Krista, what was the seed, the impetus, which put the meeting of these two amazing men into motion? Doug?
That's a great question. So actually, I've had the privilege of working with Archbishop Tutu for over a decade. And I was at his wife's 80th birthday party with a friend of mine named Jim Doty, who was the chairman of the Dalai Lama Foundation. And he turned to me and he said, what do you think about the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Tutu doing a book together? And I said, I thought it was a brilliant idea. And I have a short list of all the people in the world I most want to work with. And the Dalai Lama was on that list, and their working together was an idea that I fantasized about. And so we turned to we asked each other, what would it be about? And we both turned to each other at the same time and said, joy. Because these are two of the most joyous people on the planet. So I turned to Archbishop Tutu when we were eating sandwiches at his office, and I said, so would you like to do a book with the Dalai Lama? And he said, I'd do anything with that man. Because they just love each other. They're just amazing friends. I mean, and that's what's so incredible is, I guess, when you're a global icon and a Nobel Peace Prize winner, you don't have a lot of buddies. You don't have a lot of mates. And just to see them together, they're like schoolboys, and they just love being with each other. They love doing things with each other. And it was just wonderful to see the pure joy of friendship when we were together, when they had that opportunity.
Absolutely brilliant. Krista, I hope that answers your question. Thank you for that, Doug. And here, there's lots more questions. Nee, you're saying, do we start peace from within or outside, Doug?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Tutu would say the answer is unequivocally that we have to start it within our own hearts and minds. And that really what they said was, the problem of the 21st century is increasingly we have the material well-being around the world. Obviously, there's still a lot of poverty that needs to be addressed, but increasingly the greatest challenge to us as a species, as a people, is in our own minds and hearts. And how do we use this prosperity? How do we use these tools for the benefit of all? And how do we create a world where there is less fear, anger, and sadness, and more joy? So definitely inside. Now, that I think they would also say that we can create conditions in our families, in our communities, in our world where it's more likely that we're going to have joy and peace, because there's a world that contributes to that. And they're both big advocates for education and for teaching people and teaching very young how to cultivate these qualities in their own lives.
Awesome.
Great question, Yum.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
If you like the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, please like us, like them as well. That would be great.
Yeah, definitely. You can follow them on their pages, of course, as well. The Book of Joy. Molly, how can I simultaneously focus on gratitude and joy while I responsibly keep informed and read about devastating tragedies going on? So I think that's a really relevant question.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
how do we balance the two? How do we feel joy and experience joy when we know so much bad's going on? How does it work, Doug?
Great question, Molly. What I would say is, so in the book, there are really three sections that kind of address this in different ways. So there's the nature of true joy, which explains what joy is. And then they talked about the obstacles to joy, like that fear and that despair. And they actually have a whole chapter on despair and how do we deal with, the world that we're facing. And then in the third part is the 8 pillars of joy that they believe are fundamental to having a life of joy. And one of those is actually gratitude, which is what made me think of it when you were talking about living with joy and gratitude and looking at the world. And I think nobody would accuse these two men of looking at the world with rose-colored glasses. And I think they look directly into the face of the great suffering that exists. And one of the things that was so profound about their conversation was the book is about joy in the face of suffering and joy in the face of adversity. So it's not about kind of don't worry, be happy. It's not about look away from what is really happening in your life or in our collective life on the planet. So I think what they would say, though, is that actually, and this was one of the most amazing things that I learned while I was working with them on the book, is that if you are able to look, you have really two choices. You can look into suffering, and actually the more you look into your own suffering or the world's suffering, the more you are capable of experiencing joy. So it's like a volume button on life. You either turn down the volume on everything and numb yourself both to the suffering but also to the joy, or you turn the volume up and you experience everything more profoundly, both the joy and the suffering. And I think these are two men who laugh very easily. They cry. They're very, that is our humanity. And so I think the point is not to turn away from the suffering. In fact, it's to recognize. And I think this is one of the things they said very specifically to the question about how do we have joy and gratitude in our own lives, even while there's pain and suffering among the ones we love or those around us. And what they said so beautifully was actually, if you look for the helpers, if you look for all what's happening in response, even to the pain, to the terrorist attacks, to the suffering, the way that these are aberrations, and you look and you widen your perspective. So one of the 8 pillars of joy that they talk about is perspective. And this was really quite profound, of shifting your perspective, creating a wider perspective. So you're not just seeing the terrorist attack. You're not just seeing the shooting that's happening. You're not just seeing that suffering. You're seeing that in the context of the whole of what's happening, whether that's those who are helping, whether it's the love that's being given from around the world, and recognizing that, as the Archbishop said, we are good. We are fundamentally good. And it's so easy to be swayed by the news to think that, fundamentally there's something wrong with us. But ultimately, the reason, as the Dalai Lama said, that news is because it's the aberration. It's actually the exception. And if you look at all the love that parents are giving to children every day, all the love that's being given in hospitals, the Archbishop is actually in the hospital at the moment, recovering from an infection. And when you're actually in the hospital even, and you're in pain and suffering, and you look to the gentleness of the nurse and the kindness and the fact that you're able to be in this hospital and get this kind of care, or we're able to be in a world where even despite the pain and the suffering that's happening, there is so much compassion, so much kindness, so much generosity. That shift in perspective can allow you to live with more joy and gratitude. I hope that helps, Molly.
Yeah,
Definitely
definitely.
helped me.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Molly, for that great question. And thanks, Doug, for that answer as well, looking at how to amplify positivity, not really looking at those two things as separate. One of the things I wanted to ask you, Doug, was around this piece that 72% of people who feel stress daily feel that it interferes with their lives, right? They feel that it touches upon their lives. So what did the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu have to say around stress and anxiety, something that everyone in the world experiences?
Yeah, totally. It's such a universal reality of stress and anxiety, and it was really quite interesting to talk to them about how they deal with stress and anxiety in their own lives, how they shift that perspective, and I think the reality is that what the Dalai Lama said, which was so interesting, was actually stress and anxiety often come from too much expectation, too much ambition. Actually, which was interesting for me, being an American, where ambition is kind of a virtue, the ultimate virtue in some way. And what he said was, when we go in with all this expectation about how life should be, we create this kind of stress and anxiety when it isn't that way. And one of the other pillars of joy is acceptance. Actually, there were four pillars of the mind. This might be interesting for your viewers to hear. They talked about four pillars of the mind and four pillars of the heart that were the pillars of joy. And so those pillars were perspective, what we were talking about before, humility, humor, which was fascinating and we talked about a little before about how important humor is to joy, and then acceptance, which is the fourth pillar of the mind. And then the four pillars of the heart were forgiveness, gratitude, which Molly raised earlier, compassion, and generosity. And so this acceptance, this ability to accept reality as it is on its own terms, which doesn't mean, the chapter on acceptance is called Acceptance, the Only Place from Which Change Can Occur. And so we have to accept, actually, it doesn't mean acquiescence. It doesn't mean we give up. It doesn't mean, that we don't stand up to injustice. But it means we accept the reality that's happening in our life and the reality of what's happening in our world. And I think often stress and anxiety are very much about the resistance that we have to things being as they are, or frankly, creating unrealistic expectations or ambitions for ourselves that ultimately then we get frustrated by. So that was fascinating to hear him talk about that. I hope that's helpful.
Doug, I'm reading out this great question from Cindy. How can we teach our children true compassion? We see war and violence on TV every day, or they do themselves in the news, and people don't seem to care about people suffering. How do you teach children compassion?
Well, that's a great question. And I think just to start it with the fact that both the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu see the teaching of compassion to our children as perhaps one of the most important things that we can do to create that world that we all want, that world where there's greater peace. It's absolutely essential and fundamental. And I think they would say that it really begins from what we model for them. And yes, the world that we are in often doesn't value compassion or doesn't demonstrate compassion. But if we show that in our families and in our schools, and actually, I think there's a great movement here in the United States to actually bring compassion training into our schools to help recognize that these are capacities that we can cultivate. And I think that's one of the things that both the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Tutu would say, is that these are like muscles that we can cultivate, just like the compassion reflex, or we have a kind of reflex towards compassion, but it is also actually a muscle that we can cultivate, so that we actually do need to create opportunities for our children. And I'll give you a personal example. I have three wonderful children, and one of my kids actually had they had a little bit of an empathy deficit when they were a child. And, it's like, when our child has trouble reading, we think, well, we just need to give them, remedial lessons in reading. Well, this one of my children had amazing reading skills, but a little bit of an empathy deficit. So we actually worked with a neuropsychiatrist who's one of my clients as well, who encouraged us to help rewire the neurons of the brain by giving experience, by giving relationships. So when we were reading books, we would say things like, what do you think that character's feeling? And helping them to put themselves in that perspective and to cultivate that compassion. And actually, where we put our attention, according to the brain scientists, is where our neurons fire, and where our neurons fire, they rewire. And I'm delighted to say that my child is now a 17-year-old, extremely compassionate, extremely empathic young adult. And so it is possible for us to enrich our children's lives by giving them these opportunities to witness compassion, to practice compassion. It really is a discipline that we can cultivate, as all of the 8 pillars are.
Absolutely. So you're here tuned in live right now on International Day of Peace, talking about the Book of Joy, this fascinating conversation between His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And we're on social media talking about this. We're using social media, and Rainey has asked this great question. She's saying, how can we be more compassionate with people in our Facebook feed who are spreading hate and fear? And I think social media is amplifying the roots and challenges that are already there. So I see social media as more of an amplifier than a source. But when we're seeing people amplify hate, anxiety, envy, fear, how do we tolerate that, and how do we respond?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I agree with you that I think that social media, the internet is really like a global brain. It's like a global neural net of the whole world. And so all of the chatter and all the thoughts that we have just get amplified, and they go beyond our own head and into the world. And so I think it's partly recognizing that fear, anger, and sadness that we're seeing in the world are just fundamentally human. They are part of each of us. So approaching that other person not from a place of judgment, but from recognition of their humanity, that what is promoting that is their own fear and their own anger. And then to approach them in a way, whether it's, probably they would say, private message them so that they're not, so you're not socially shaming them. But also there is a role for standing up in public to those kind of comments, and as compassionately and kindly as possible trying to present an alternative view. And I think that's the one thing I will say, that, anger has its place. And Archbishop Tutu, when he was standing up to apartheid South Africa, and he's called a rebel rouser for peace, and he is not afraid to use righteous indignation for the good of all. And I asked him, I said, so what's the role between anger that is useful and anger that is not? And he said that fundamentally righteous anger and indignation is not about yourself. It's not about taking offense. It's about protecting and helping others. Mm-hmm. So when we see on the internet that people are spreading rumors or hatred, I think it is our duty to stand up and protect those who are being attacked, but to do it in a way, and this is the other thing, often when we use humor, this is incredible. Desmond Tutu told stories about going into Rwanda after the genocide and actually talking to the people of Rwanda about the genocide and using humor to get beyond the defenses and the anger and the pain and the suffering to our core humanity. So the more we can use humor and playfulness and fun and defuse the anger and the outrage that we see around us, that can often be very helpful as well.
I absolutely love how we're diffusing and demystifying spiritual traditions into humor as well. It's such a great thing that comes out of conversation, and when you see two mature and enlightened people in a conversation, it seems like from the way you're sharing it, Doug, that it seems like that was the most prevalent type of communication in that week, which is really refreshing. And I wanted to extend that. When I was reading the book this weekend, I wanted to extend, and I love this principle. I've always connected with it. And hearing that they both spoke about this item of when one of the reasons why we struggle so much is because of our fixation on ourselves, but actually so many of our troubles will be relieved when we serve other people, or when we act in our way of serving others. Can you talk a bit about what was said in the beautiful Book of Joy on that, and what you found from that?
Yeah, this is a really important point that you're raising, Jay. And I think that this was one of the core themes that came out in the book, which is really the fastest way to have more joy in your life is to bring joy to others. And it really, so much of what they talked about is what causes us suffering and pain is our own self-regard, our own self-absorption. And when we are able, which is not to say we can't have a healthy and important sense of self-preservation and self-understanding and self-awareness, these are all vital and important. But when we're able to go beyond our own limited self-interest, when we're able to go and reach out to others, then actually actually, that is where our greatest joy comes from. And it was interesting, the scientists also confirmed this as well, that Richie Davidson, who's a neuroscientist in Wisconsin, was talking about that we have 4 fundamental human brain circuits, and one of them that lead to well-being and happiness. And one of those brain circuits is actually generosity, an entire brain circuit. We are wired for generosity and kindness for one another. We're a social species. And the way the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu talk about it is we are just fundamentally a social species. We don't survive. We don't live without one another. With the mother's love, the nurturance that we get from our parents, we can't survive without that. We can't survive without that kind of social connection. So we really are all wired to. This is a fascinating thing. Thinking of social media, one of Nicholas Christakis at Yale did this fascinating study that shows that when you're kind, not only are your friends more kind, but your friends are more likely to be kind and generous.
Wow.
So it's actually this ripple effect, and that when we do this, when we are kind and compassionate in our own lives, that ripples out to the second and third degree, and it's quite powerful. So when we're coming back to that question on Peace Day of how we create a more compassionate and peaceful world, that's how these ripples can impact in the world.
Brilliant. And how is it, so we've spoken about this principle of that we're already kind, we're wired to be generous, right? Generosity is wired within us. What did the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu say about almost what it sounds like is that we're having to reawaken what we've forgotten or excavate a part of ourselves that is buried under layers of nothingness that's not us? You know, what is that process that we all go through to reconnect to who we already are? It's almost like we have muddy water. We know that water is pure and we've got to remove this mud out of it. What is that process? How do we all go on that journey?
Well, it's a great question. Actually, they talked about joy as our kind of natural state, our natural birthright. And it's in many cases about getting back to that natural state. And it's also about the practices that we do in our lives, so it's partly about understanding. So understanding how we overcome the obstacles of joy, how we how we cultivate the pillars of joy. But in the book, actually, we provide the joy practices that the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu do on a daily basis, the things that they do to true themselves and keep themselves focused. One of the things Archbishop Tutu says is as a reverend, people think that he needs to pray and meditate. And he said, actually, it's so much more necessary for people who live in the marketplace all the time and are dealing with all, the hurry and bustle and, of that world, to find that time to quiet themselves, to reflect, to come back to their core nature. So it's almost, as you said, it's like a rediscovery of who we are. And it's a cultivation of those capacities as well.
Now, I know the book talks about going through hard times and tough times, and it talks about suffering. So Samora has given a great question here. She says, how can you deal with the pain and suffering caused by natural disasters and not caused only by humans and beyond human capacity?
That is a wonderful question. So I think just to say a little bit about suffering and adversity, since the whole book is really about joy in the face of adversity, one of the things that they talked about is how adversity is an opportunity that the Dalai Lama said adversity is an opportunity that destiny has given you. It's this thing that actually we don't grow without some resistance. It's actually in this life, in this human reality, our capacities lie dormant. It's kind of like what Archbishop Tutu called a sofa cabbage or a couch potato. Like if you're always sitting on the couch, your muscles are not going to grow. You have to climb up mountains. And similarly, in our lives, we need to cultivate that kind of, we need to encounter that kind of resistance and adversity in order to grow and develop. So one of the things, actually, speaking of natural disasters, is the Dalai Lama was talking from the very beginning of the fact that we can't stop the suffering from natural disasters. We can't stop the suffering from earthquakes. And this was actually a theme that came out throughout the week. And actually, 45 seconds after the film crew that was on the ground left Dharamsala, the Nepalese earthquake struck. And it was an incredibly poignant reminder of what it was. Obviously, our hearts were suffering with all those who were suffering in Nepal and throughout the whole region. But it's a reminder that we cannot stop. We can't stop those kind of natural disasters. But as the Dalai Lama said, so much of the human-made disasters, the suffering that we choose, the chosen suffering, that we can fundamentally shift dramatically and create more joy in our lives and in the world.
Absolutely. So it's that bringing back to that theme of acceptance and then knowing where you have the options to change. The Book of Joy is available for order today, so you can get your hands on it. If you've been enjoying this conversation with Doug, it's something that you've got to read and learn about all these various themes that we've dived into today. Doug, I'm going to hand over to you now for any last messages you have for the viewers, last words that you want to leave them with on International Day of Peace.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think it is just an honor to be speaking with you, Jay, on this day, and in honor of these two extraordinary peace laureates and peace icons in the world. And to say that really, I think the final statement goes back to the Dalai Lama, that the way we create peace in the world is by creating peace in our hearts and in our minds. And the goal here was fundamentally to create a guidebook and to allow readers to experience what it's like to spend a week with these extraordinary human beings that present the opportunity of what we can all experience and achieve fundamentally in our own life, and how we can work together to create that world that they know is possible for us.
Excellent. Doug, we really look forward to having you physically in the studio with us as well, but
Great.
We're really delighted that you could join us virtually today. I hope that all of you watching from home, from work, from on the road, wherever you've tuned into this live today, have really taken away some nuggets of wisdom just like I've had. I've learned so much today, and I hope that you're going to go away, order the book if you found this conversation interesting, exciting, and intriguing, and really look at all of this adversity that we see in the world on a daily basis, weekly basis, we see in the media, wherever it is, to really look at all of that adversity as an opportunity to bring joy in our lives and in the lives of others, just as stated with this beautiful conversation between Desmond Tutu and Dalai Lama, beautifully compiled by Doug Abrams, who's been joining us today. Doug, thank you so much once again for being with us. I hope you have an amazing day. I hope that all of you have an amazing International Day of Peace. And I look forward to you all ordering the Book of Joy as well. Thank you so much, Doug.
Thank you, Jay. It was just a privilege and a joy to be with you.